Welcome to class. Basically, today is our last day before your poetry test. So this will be, good news is, this will be our last day of dealing with poetry and teaching poetry until we review it next semester. So what I want to do today is go over basically skim over and go over chapter 6 on symbol. We're not going to do much with allegory. Go over the figurative language 3 from chapter 7 that we had, the paradox, overstatement, understatement, and irony. And then we're going to look at, you all did on both digging and Ozymandias. You chose an approach to that. And so what I kind of want to do today to prep you for the essay you're going to do on Thursday is look at which approach you chose and compare the approaches in terms of what will prepare you best and what would work best for an AP exam. Like what are the advantages you've learned, you've covered. We did diddles, but we all know that can kind of fold into, I know you don't like that word, that can fold into TP cast. What is it? Slids?
Slids.
But to compare TP cast and restate theme, so what and how and moment, and which works better for which poems, to kind of look at when you get it on AP test, how to do it in 40 minutes to apply this. And then at the end of class, the next half, we'll look at the writing about poetry and kind of transition from how do we take this and how do we apply this then, because restate theme, which kind of leads us to this whole how do we craft an essay on this in 40 minutes or so. And then at the end, if we have some time, we'll go over the multiple choice practice, and I will let you know exactly what's going to be on the test on Thursday. So first thing, if you guys take out the packets, which much of you have already done, take out the chapter 6 and 7 packet, not the writing about poetry packet. And I just want you guys right now, just because it's been a little bit since we had the test last time, take a moment to skim over the reading on chapter 6 on the symbol one and on the overstatement, understatement one, chapter 7. Just to skim over, we're going to walk through these. I think a lot of this, particularly the symbol stuff, is almost review because it was in the nature of proof and the interpretation of poetry. You maybe even recognize the sick rose again. But just take a moment to skim over it and look for any questions. Skim over your annotations and look for any questions you had on it. Okay. I just wanted you guys to, starting with chapter 6, and a lot of this, obviously, are things you know. You've been covering symbol, you've been covering these things in class, but on the AP test, it's kind of about going to the next level and looking at things on this. So on the symbol, any questions on this, first of all, that you had from this packet or this chapter? Yeah?
I'm confused with the difference between a metaphor and a symbol.
What's the difference between a metaphor and a symbol? Somebody else want to take this for her? Go ahead. Me? Behind you.
A metaphor is comparing it to something that it is not, where a symbol is what it is and more, if that makes sense.
It's both definitions at once.
Isn't it also that a metaphor typically has one alternate meaning and a symbol can have many?
Yeah.
Isn't it also just that you can interpret a symbol in like a broader context, whereas like the metaphor is just a comparison?
Yeah, a metaphor is going to be, yeah, you're all right on this. Is this getting more clear or no? Here's the other, go ahead, Alan.
Like, a blank is a blank would be a metaphor. Like, as in, I'm trying to think of an example, but it's, no, I can't think of it.
Let me help you out on this. Okay, go ahead, Charlotte.
Sorry. So like if you said my heart is a singing bird, then your heart is not a singing bird, it's a heart. But
The heart could mean something.
But like if you say like with the rose and the worm poem, and the worm is like infesting the rose, that can literally be a worm infesting a rose. You know what I mean? Like it can literally be about worms eating a rose, but it can also be about the corruption of like innocence or love.
Thanks.
Okay, so, and this is actually, if you guys go right there in the packet, online one of the things it says, images, it's a good question. Images, metaphor, and symbol shade into each other and are sometimes difficult to distinguish. I think one of the key things to this, and the key particularly for AP, is not just recognizing these, much more important than recognizing a symbol or a metaphor, or even more when we look into the irony, is identifying how it is used in a poem. So I mean, and these can overlap. They talk about an image. An image can also be a symbol, can't it? So you need to talk about it as an image. It doesn't cease to be an image just because it's a symbol. So if you look at this, I mean, an image means what it is. An image is some kind of sensory image, and we talked about that before. We talked about all the different, the five senses, plus kinesthetic and organic imagery and all of that. But a figurative term, it means a metaphor or a simile. And remember, a simile is like a metaphor. A metaphor or a as the other side gets it. A metaphor means something other than what it is, whereas a symbol means what it is and something more than what it is. So for example, in something you're all familiar with, you all read Gatsby?
Yeah.
Okay, the green light at the end of the dock, one of the most famous symbols in literature, in Moby Dick, the white whale. It is a green light, isn't it? But it's also more than the green light because it symbolizes something else. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it partakes of the reality of which it is also symbolizing. Does that make sense? But bear in mind, it's murky. It can kind of shift between a metaphor and a simile. Sometimes, and you guys were all right in saying symbols. Remember when we did that reading on symbols where it talks about how it's like a spotlight that goes out? When we were talking, and this is like a beam. And it can have any number of different interpretations, but as long as you're within like that cone of light, you're okay. And the problem, I think, one of the tough things with symbols is knowing how far to go with it. This is what's hard in poetry is. And I think, and they say here, and I agree, it's better to err on the side of caution than to try to find a symbol where a symbol isn't. Does that make sense? So like when they were talking about in that one we did a while ago, The Sick Rose by William Blake, that rose could symbolize any number of things, but it's also a rose, first of all, right? And it can't symbolize absolutely anything. The rose and the worm, the rose has to symbol goodness or purity or beauty or femininity or generally something positive in that poem, whereas the worm is going to be some negative or corrupting agent. So like, does that make sense? And it's not a metaphor because it's actually, it is the rose rather than a rose is Emily or Emily is a rose, if you were to say that in a rose frame. Does that make sense? They say here, irony is a literary tool used in service of sarcasm, that's used in service of satire. What's the difference between irony and satire then?
Satire
It's
like,
to show you stuff for learning.
yeah, that's like a detailed critique with like the hopes of changing something, like political or social.
Yeah, it's
Like,
like
I
sort of
think-
useful.
Yeah, irony is like a tool, but satire is more of a genre in my idea. In my,
Okay,
Satire is not intended to hurt anyone either. Isn't it intended to like teach a lesson?
yeah, that's basically, satire has a higher motive. You know, satire has a higher motive. What's our obvious examples of satire?
19,
Anything by Mark
Animal
Twain.
Farm.
Animal Farm. What about in pop culture?
Crude food.
Crude of Food, good example. Crude of Food. But think about Jon Stewart
Oh, yeah.
show, or even more, The Colbert.
Yeah,
The Colbert Show is
John
satire, right?
yeah.
Because it is, he is ironic in it, but he's using irony to get across a point and to teach. So that's what makes it a satirical show. The Onion, trying to get across a point, or The Levee. The Levee is fantastic. So anything else on this? What about overstatement and understatement? How are these different?
They do different things.
Okay, but how are they different than these other things? Are they similar
Yeah,
to
there's-
irony in some ways or no?
Well,
Well, it's not opposite, it's
Yeah.
sort of just the same except too much or too little.
yeah. I mean, you're kind of saying something you don't mean when you are using overstatement or understatement, so it is like irony, but it's a very specific type of saying something you don't mean. Like,
Okay.
the example in the test that we took of understatement was the best example of understatement I've ever seen. It was like, this woman was filleted the other day, and
Yeah.
if you
That was
believe it or
brutal.
not, she looks like she had some better days.
Yeah. Okay, perfect example of that. And you're gonna see these a lot, I mean, in poetry and recognizing them. So we're all kind of clear on this? Same thing in poetry, and what you're gonna see, and this is where I think so much confusion and why people miss it in poetry. You're looking at poet, speaker, and while we don't, with the exception of things they carried, often confuse our author and our narrator, we know that's somebody that's often a character in the book. Often we get poet, speaker, sometimes you do have characters in these, and then the same thing. We're gonna confuse this. And that irony just comes from the difference between the speaker and the poet. Think about it, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, in the books are dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, if you didn't, you could get, like, the point that he was making, but if you didn't get that the poet and the speaker were two different people, you wouldn't understand, like, the poet's critique about that type of person.
You're talking about the Philip Larkin, that ends "Get stewed, books are a load of crap."
Yeah.
When the author is actually someone who worked in a university library all of his life and is a poet and is dedicated to this. But yeah, you would miss that. If you miss that on an AP exam or an AP essay, you're gonna get a 5. Yeah.
Is it safer to assume there is irony or isn't? Because like, what if I just assume they're being ironic, but then they're being like serious?
That's when it so depends on the poem.
Oh.
I think it's safer to assume they're not being ironic.
Okay.
It would be worse to read irony into like a straightforward, heartfelt love poem. But also know that on AP, they're not gonna give you generally a very straightforward poem. All the poems they're gonna give you on a test are gonna have some levels of complexity. I mean, one thing on these essays is embrace the ambiguity. Know that there's going to be more than one interpretation of this poem. They're not gonna give you something that there's one answer. They have hundreds of thousands of very bright students analyzing this. There has to be some play there for there to be different interpretations and different levels of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other than that, any other questions on this? Pretty clear? All right, next step, what I really want to do is look at this in terms of these poems, one of which was very symbolic, the Seamus Heaney digging, and then the other which was a pretty good example of irony, which is Ozymandias. And what I want you guys to do, divide you into groups. How many people on digging applied, raise your hand if you applied TP cast to digging? Most of you, okay. Did anyone apply restate theme to digging? Did anybody do moment? Couple, okay. What about on Ozymandias? How many people did TP cast? Okay, a little less. How many people did moment? Couple, and how many people did restate theme? Okay, we got a couple on each, this will work. What I want to do is just look at in groups, and I'm not sure how I'm going to divide you exactly on this. Looking at and getting people who did different approaches to each poem in the same group. What I want you to do first, though, is briefly, super short journal. And you can do this right in your packet, or do this in your journals. Why did you choose this approach to this poem? Just brief, one sentence on each of these, or two. Why do you think this particular approach, or how would this approach help you for doing an AP essay? And then also look at what is, or when you did it, what was lacking in this approach, and what would you need to do to supplement it?
We wrote it nice this time.
Is the left-hand journal?
This would be a right-hand journal. Everything's right-hand journal until the end.
Doing this lesson?
Oh yeah, do we have a
No.
sheet?
No.
Oh.
No.
we discussed this in class, let's just get into groups and like look at the poem. So like, having looked at why you chose this particular response, based on the groups you get, I want you to get in and discuss the poem. But more than just the poem we're looking at today, because you guys are already pretty good at that, I want you to look at what does your approach bring to the poem as you're discussing it, and discuss that among yourselves. Then we're gonna bring that back to the class as a whole and share that. So can you guys remember your groups and get into those?
2 digging, right here.
See, you can really
And,
guess
bring
the
your
move.
homework with you, because I'm gonna come by and check homework too.
One digging.
Yeah,
right here. One digging.
So,
Are we just discussing something?
yeah.
Yeah.
The poem was saying. Digging is
That wasn't gonna be an
Cool.
I thought it was talking about how like, younger generations are trying to break away from like the older generations and they're trying to like break away molds, but it's difficult because
Not only that, but
like they look back on
like,
everything that their parents did and they see how like hard they worked and then them going a different path
they're
is
talking
like
about like.
is more difficult.
Like they want to go a different path, but they still want to honor their parents.
I thought it was like a continuation of his father. Like I think the poem starts out like discussing how his life's different. He's kind of lamenting on like how his dad actually worked hard. And he's just writing.
His dad and his
But then,
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
But then the last line, I think the last line like brings it full circle and he realizes that he's doing his own work and like he can be fulfilled in the same way they were by physical labor and probably using his own.
That's how I thought it was like him trying to fit into their shoes but like not knowing how doing his own thing.
Yeah, but I think that in the end, he
But he's
concludes
looking at
that
his
he
father
probably does have
in
parents that's similar to theirs, but it's just different. Yeah, it's different, but it's a different type of digging. So like I think that understanding the different connotations of the word digging, the different meanings.
Also, you can think of it like digging into the past.
Yeah, I mean like he does that with memories.
It doesn't really seem like it's
throughout.
Yeah, that was my first time doing it. I had no idea what I was looking at, so it's like.
It's true.
I actually like looked it up.
No, I
can see if you just read that part.
Apparently, he's like Irish, so.
Nothing else.
Yeah, I think that talks about that.
The whole ball.
Alright, cool. Alright, so listen, what I want to hear from you guys as you're presenting, I want to hear from each group, like, first I want to hear your interpretations of the poem, what you guys thought about it, but I want to hear looking at how did these different approaches, what was strong in them and what was weak on them as well. But first, Digging by Seamus Haney. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean, rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father, digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle, corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head, but I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. So, what did you guys, let's start with you. What did you find in this poem?
Okay, so, wait.
And there's a lot there.
Yeah, there were a lot of symbols that we found. So like obviously the main thing is like digging, and we think that it's sort of like is a reflection on like his family traditions, and like it's like obviously about his dad and grandfather and like their trade, but like also how his own trade as like a writer is similar and how he's like proud of that, even though it's like not following in the same tradition as his family, I guess. And there were some other roots.
Yeah, we thought that like, the part where it's talking about roots, I think it's just like one word kind of thrown in. I thought that it was like more meaningful than just words thrown in, because we're talking about family roots and digging into that. And the digging was the biggest like symbolism there, and then there's a lot of like metaphorical and more symbolic language underneath that. Like the pen is like symbolic for writing, you could say it's an economy really. So is the shovel for digging, and all of that. We said that he's content with choosing his own path as well, and being a writer and not going into the potato business. So it's about your family and then also like yourself as an individual.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, kind of what Katie was saying about the pen and digging is kind of a metaphor for Spade, like his own kind of Spade digging within himself for inspiration and things to write about.
Yeah, I think it's digging both physically and metaphorically here, isn't it?
Yeah.
What else? What did you guys find
I
out?
think he was also digging through time and like searching for memories, because that's kind of what was happening throughout the poem, is he's going from one time to another and looking at his father and his grandfather, and like his pen is his spade to dig through that time.
Okay. What did you get in terms of this one? What did you find in terms of attitude? And where do we find the shifts for those who did TP cast? Yeah.
Like the basic attitude would be that he's very reminiscent of the past. As he's like, well, he's looking out the window, he's thinking about his father when he was younger.
Okay, he's looking at his father and that. What else?
In line 15, where he like kind of reflects overtly about like, by God, this old man, like he, I don't know, it's like a pause, it's a couplet right in the middle of it. It kind of has this like lamenting sense, like this attitude of lamentation that stays throughout the poem for the rest of it.
Okay, and if these are his attitudes, what is his attitude towards his father and his grandfather?
He's very respectful.
Very sentimental.
Sentimental, respectful, impressed with them. Does he value their manual labor more, you think, almost, or less than his writing, Victoria?
I think either like a little bit more, like around the same. I think he's like looks at them as more of like people to like fill their shoes in his life. Like he has like big shoes to fill, and then I think throughout the entire poem he was kind of like struggling with whether or not his like trade was going to be as good or better than theirs. And I think at the end he finally comes to terms with it, and it's like, no, like I am doing my duty and like I'm doing my job. It's just different from theirs, but like equal.
Okay, no, what were you gonna add?
Well, this was sort of just a question in general. So like, I don't think I would have realized that it was writer's block just on my own. So on like an AP test,
Yes.
would that be like, you would get like the extra points for seeing that it's writer's block, that you wouldn't do as well?
Well, okay, any interpretation you go with on this, remember, if you can back it up, is that the only interpretation of this? I mean, I think that seems to be a valid interpretation, doesn't it? Like, because at the end he does write, would that be the only way? That would, yes, that would bump it up. If you get that, that's gonna bump him to 9. Oh, you got where this poem is. Because, I mean, then he goes through and digs through his own history of memories to come up with what he wants to write about, right? And it's a kind of interesting recursive process, because then at the end of that we end up with this poem about him sitting and with writer's block. So yeah, you'd get probably better if you catch that. Do you have to catch that to get it? To get a good grade? No. If you get that he's sitting there and you're getting the nostalgia. But the other key, so we know what he's saying here, right? The other part of AP is, how is he getting it across? What is he using? These are all the things in these different approaches. Whether it's the connotation in TP cast, whether it's restate theme, so what, and the how part of that. Because remember that restate theme, so what, and how is what builds to your thesis. So what? What is the author? What is the poet saying, or what is the poem saying? And how does he get this point across to us? What are the things he uses? What?
Potatoes.
Repetition.
Potatoes as a symbol of life.
Potatoes as a symbol of life. If we're gonna go with potatoes as a symbol, what other symbols do we have in this poem?
The spade.
Like, remember, a symbol is an object that is itself, but it is also used as something else. And like you said, that was metonymy, the spade and the pen for writing, kind of. And the writer. So we have a pen, a spade. We've got potatoes. And notice the potatoes too, loving their cool hardness in our hands. He holds that potato just like he holds the pen.
Oh, baby, cool artist.
Crushing babies and
Flower beds. Also looking at, we've got 3 different people. What do they all dig? Do they dig the same?
No.
Potatoes and then
Potatoes, memories, and peat.
Okay, we've got 3 things they dig. Peat. What is peat?
It's not soil, it's you dry it out and then you burn it for fuel.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what his grandfather dug for, right? Fuel, right? His father dug for what? Potatoes. And what later?
Flowers.
Flowers. What's the difference in digging for peat versus digging for a garden, like potatoes, versus digging for a flower bed?
Shows they're becoming more successful. They are getting better in life.
Yeah, shows more successful becoming better in life. If you're digging for peat, I mean, this is what you have. Peat is that loam or stuff at the top that's then dried out and burned, right? Or it's used as fertilizer. That would be just to keep people warm. His father, earlier, 20 years ago, dug for food and potatoes. And if we look now, he's in a flower bed. This is a luxury, isn't it? To have both the time and the space to be able, I mean, if you're poor Irish, you don't have the space to dedicate to potatoes. You know, you can't dedicate that space to having a flower bed. That's a luxury. Alan?
Also, in the early 1900s, I think that was when the potato famine was going on in Ireland. So, you know, it was like that he's what? It was before that?
It was the late 19th century.
You're close enough.
It's about a decade before.
Yeah. Okay. Well, still. Around that time with the potato famine, so potatoes like were a big deal. Like you gotta just get those potatoes to live. Like so what they were doing was basically keeping the family alive, and so maybe now like he has his job, his digging isn't that important. It's not keeping other people alive. So maybe he just feels a bit of inferiority there.
Okay, but at the end, does he lose that inferiority?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think this is kind of where, looking at the different approaches, the moment kicks in. It plays with these oppositional forces. Who did moment on this? Was it useful to you, and why?
The oppositional force.
Any of the moment, the movement, because it deals much more with opposition and movement and the tension in the poem. What did you guys?
There was a bit of tension from the speaker about like how he felt about himself. And he kind of said, he said himself, like, I'll never be, he said something like this, but he was like, I'll never be the men that they were, or something like that. So there was a bit of tension because he wasn't entirely comfortable with his lifestyle.
But I feel like at that point though, when he's saying I'll never be them, he said, yeah, he does say something like that. He's like, I won't be the men that they were, but just because like he's not really interested in digging for potatoes, like he doesn't really want to be the men that they were.
Yeah, but at the same time, yeah, like there is a sense of like him not being 100% happy.
There is. Does that shift?
Yeah.
Is it, and that's, I mean, is that the movement in this poem? Is that shifting from that unhappy, we all sense something about that unhappiness, right? But if we're gonna put this into an essay and make a good essay about this, we're gonna have to show not just, I mean, sure, Seamus Heaney, great poet, one of my favorite poets, does such a good job with really simple things like this, but we need to explain how we got that, why this poem was good, why it affected us. We all got this feeling at the beginning, whether it's you saying there was something almost suicidal about this gun at the beginning, there was a negativity. What are you guys all noticing this, at the beginning, him not feeling as much of a man as his forebears, as his ancestors, right? But what we've got to get across is, how does he do that? How is that seen in here? And this is what's going to take our essays up to the 7, 8, 9 range. Yeah, okay. Let's move on and look at the same thing with Ozymandias, which is a completely different poem. Someone want to read that one out loud? Do a volunteer? Do I have to do it again? All right.